The sky above Icaros. 9 shimmered with a sickly orange glow, the atmosphere torn open by weeks of relentless bombardment. Smoke curled in slow spirals across the shattered colony, curling around broken towers and collapsed domes like ghostly fingers. Inside the last operational comm center, Commander Elira Voss wiped blood from her cheek and leaned over the console, her voice steady despite the chaos behind her. "This is Icaros 9, designation Sigma Echo 3. We are under siege. Civilians dead or dying. We've lost orbital defenses, ground support, all supply lines. To any ship, to any system. Please. We need help." She released the button. Static hiss back at her. Behind her, Lieutenant Rail staggered in, armor scorched, eyes wild. "They've breached Sector 9. They're eating people. Elira, it's not war, it's..." He couldn't finish. Elira didn't flinch. "We hold until the last breath." Her eyes flicked to the signal strength bar. Flickering. Weak. Still broadcasting. For days, they watched as the invaders poured from the rift, biomechanical horrors with no known origin, speaking no language, driven by hunger or instinct. The Council hadn't responded. Their allies hadn't responded. She suspected they wouldn't. Icaros. 9 wasn't strategic enough to die for. She keyed in the override. It bypassed normal relay routes and sent a distress call into deeper, older networks, uncharted frequency bands left over from the early expansion era. She hesitated only a second before tagging the transmission with the forbidden code, D'0471. Rail noticed. "That's Deathworlder code. Elira, are you insane? I'm out of options. They're myths. They're real enough for this." The console beeped. Signal sent. No guarantee it would be received. No promise of what would come if it was. Only silence now, and the growing stench of burning metal. Far from Icaros, 9, in the secure core of the Galactic Concordat's central spire, diplomats and commanders watched the footage without speaking. It played in silence, grainy and shaking. Soldiers being dragged screaming into the fog. Defense lines crumbling. Civilians herded into shelters that offered no protection. Counselor Moran adjusted his silken robes and turned to the room. "We cannot justify intervention. Icaros, 9 was warned of expansion into contested space. There is no value in losing more ships." A young voice cut through the murmur. They used D'0471. Heads turned. It was Archivist Sela Darn, barely 30 cycles old, barely taken seriously. She held up a trembling datapad. They invoked the Deathworlder code. Whispers spread like wildfire. One word repeated over and over, low and sharp like a blade unsheathed. "Humans. That protocol is centuries dormant," Moran said coldly. "They wouldn't have used it lightly. They wouldn't have used it sanely." Sela stepped forward. "We're talking about a colony facing extinction. If they contacted the Deathworlders, if those things are still out there, we need to know what will come." Moran waved a hand. "They won't come. And if they do, we certainly won't want them here." Another voice, gravel-thick, spoke from the shadows near the chamber's exit. Admiral Brack, one of the last veterans of the Rim Wars, didn't often speak. When he did, it quieted even the Council. "They came once before," he said. "They didn't bring peace. They brought an end. An efficient absolute end. And we survived," Moran countered. "Barely." Brack turned toward the central display again. "You want to ignore the call? Fine. But if they've heard it, this will be our problem whether we act or not." 3 days passed. The signal vanished into the void. On Icaros, 9, silence had settled like a final breath. Elira still held the command post, though only for remain with her. They'd sealed the doors from the inside. Outside, the monsters feasted. She barely heard the sound at first. A thrum beneath her feet, soft and rising, then growing into a thunder, a vibration that made the walls tremble. One of the others ran to the viewport and screamed. From orbit, a shadow fell across the colony ruins, a shape large enough to eclipse the sun. Then another. Sleek, dark vessels descended like knives cutting into the air itself. They had no insignia, no colors, Only the pulsing blue of their under-engines and the sharp glint of hull plating designed not to deter, but to devastate. Rail looked at her with wide eyes. They came. She couldn't speak. Something inside her had gone still. As the first ship touched down, a deep, sonorous hum filled the air. No translation, no words, only pressure. The creatures that had stalked the colony shrieked and fled. But too late. Beams of soundless light sliced through them. Weapons not seen in any archive. Troops disembarked, not in formation, not marching. They moved like predators, silent and fast, armor dark and scarred, visors glowing dim red. They didn't speak. They didn't scan. They simply eradicated. Elira stepped into the light of the viewport and watched them move. She expected relief. Instead, she felt dread, because these weren't saviors. They were something far older, far worse, and they had answered the call. The air around the impact zone shimmered with residual heat as the first Deathworlder dropship touched down. The ground cracked beneath its weight, scorched black from its retro-thrusters. Silence followed, the kind that pressed into the lungs and tightened the skin. No herald, no broadcast, just the groan of alloy doors peeling open. From the thick mist spilled forms in jet-black armor, mad and angular, designed to absorb and confuse sensor rays. Their silhouettes moved like phantoms, tall, broad, limbs too sure, too smooth in their articulation. The colony's last offenders, huddled behind makeshift barricades, stared from the shadows of the wrecked command post. Commander Elira Voss held her breath. The Deathworlders didn't look around. They didn't assess damage. They walked past the dead, over wreckage, directly toward the advancing swarm of biomechanical horrors that had torn to the colony like wildfire through dry grass. Elira keyed her comm, "Do not engage. Do not signal. Watch." It was Rail who whispered, "They're not even scanning them. How do they know where they are?" The Deathworlders stopped as one. Then, without warning, they attacked. There was no gunfire, not in the way Elira had known it. No pulse rounds, no plasma bolts. Instead, bursts of magnetized fleshettes and hypercondensed sonic waves shredded the enemy ranks. One of the Deathworlders unleashed a wave of what looked like liquid flame, but it curved midair, targeting only the invaders, burning through metal and bone alike. The biomechanical beasts roared. They lunged. It didn't matter. The Deathworlders moved like creatures who had evolved to dominate combat. Efficient, brutal, tireless. One leapt onto a towering bio-tank, plunged a pulsing blade into its core, and rode the creature down as it thrashed. Another deployed a hive of micro-drones that burrowed into enemy armor and detonated from within. Elira watched with a mix of awe and revulsion. She had seen soldiers. These weren't that. These were something else. Her console flickered. External comlink, one-way burst feed. No voice. No image. Only a single directive. Secure all non-combatants. Do not interfere. Do not follow. Rail read it aloud. Do not follow? They're giving us an order, Elira murmured. Not a suggestion. The battle raged across the ruins of Ikaros. But it wasn't a battle. It was a cleansing. What had been a prolonged siege turned into a massacre. In under an hour, the enemy began to retreat, not strategically but instinctively, like prey recognizing a superior predator. Still, the Deathworlders did not relent. From the edge of the remaining half-dome, a child peeked through shattered plasteel. A Deathworlder paused nearby. Its helmet turned toward the small figure. For one long moment, neither moved. Then the warrior extended a hand and dropped a small spherical device near the child's feet. It blinked blue, once, twice, then projected a shimmering dome over the area. Shielding. Protection. The child reached for it, but the Deathworlder was already gone. Elira stepped outside for the first time since the assault began. The colony was unrecognizable. Fire still burned, but there was quiet, the uncanny silence after the storm. Crater smoke where invaders had once stood. Deathworlder patrols moved through the ruins, not pausing to acknowledge her or her crew. They operated on their own frequency, governed by instincts and logic honed in crucibles the galaxy had long since abandoned. They don't speak, Rail said beside her. Not a word. They don't need to, she replied. Something larger descended from orbit, casting an immense shadow. Another ship, this one different. A command vessel. The sides bore deep gouges in old war paint. Faded symbols scorched into plating. It hovered, silent, before unleashing a dozen more figures in black. From them emerged a single being, slightly taller, armor etched in ancient runes, helmet missing. His face was human, or close, pale-lined, the eyes far too calm. He approached Elira directly. "You sent the call," he said. His voice was soft, calm, not arrogant, not warm, simply assured. "I did," she replied, meeting his eyes. "You tag it with D Prime 0471. "Yes." "You understood the implications?" "No, but I did it anyway." He nodded once. "You save lives." Then he turned to leave. Elira stepped forward. "Wait, who are you?" The man looked back at her, and something ancient flickered behind his gaze. We're what's left when diplomacy fails. The next moment, he was gone, swallowed by his cadre, vanishing into their ship like phantoms retreating into myth. Overhead, the sky shimmered again as the Deathworlder fleet began to ascend. No comms, no debrief, no offer of alliance. Only one final data burst hit Elira's console, a set of coordinates, embedded with a cryptographic key she couldn't decipher. Rael leaned over her shoulder. "What do you think it means?" She stared at the screen, heart pounding. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but they didn't come to save us." Behind them, the colony stood in ruin, but no longer under siege. The enemy was gone, erased. The survivors would rebuild, scarred but alive. And somewhere beyond the rim, the Deathworlders disappeared into the dark once more, leaving only questions in their wake. The coordinates pulsed on Elira's screen like a heartbeat. Every attempt to decode the embedded key failed. Her best systems returned only encrypted gibberish or system-level rejections. She had forwarded it to Concordat High Command, of course, but they responded with silence wrapped in bureaucratic obfuscation. Too dangerous. Too classified. Too unknown. But to Elira, the meaning was clear enough. An invitation. Or a summons. Within 3 days of planetary stabilization, she requested a vessel under her personal authority. Not a warship. Something fast, silent, unremarkable. Rael insisted on coming, despite his wounds. She didn't argue. No one else from the colony volunteered. The survivors were eager to forget, to bury the terror behind reconstruction and silence. Elira didn't blame them. They left orbit in silence, slipping past the now vacant Deathworlder blockade. Not a single ship remained. Not even debris. Their exit had been as absolute as their arrival. The destination was on the edge of a forgotten system, once listed as a mining hub before being wiped from public records during the Rim Wars. The jump was turbulent. Gravity wells distorted their sensors, and strange magnetic interference played havoc with the ship's stabilizers. When they dropped from FTL, there was nothing. No planet, no station, only a slow drift of black rock and a scattering of stars. Rael frowned. This can't be it. But Elira stared out the viewport, watching space ripple. It's not empty, just hiding. Moments later, the illusion fell away. A structure revealed itself, not with lights or movement, but with absence. A hole in space, jagged-edged and immense. It wasn't a station. It wasn't a ship. It was something in between. A fortress built from asteroid remnants, repurposed wreckage, and alien alloys she couldn't identify. It pulsed with an eerie rhythm, as if alive. A voice entered their ship, not through comms, but directly into the auditory nerves. Approach. Elira tensed. Rael looked pale. That wasn't translated. That was inside me. The ship guided itself without input, drawn like a thread toward the structure. As they neared, docking clamps extended like insect limbs, locking them in place with surgical precision. The airlock cycled. The ship gave them no choice. Inside, the light was dim. Gray-blue hues cast long shadows across a metallic corridor lined with conduits pulsing with violet energy. Symbols lined the walls, half erased or etched over again and again. Footsteps echoed faintly ahead. The same figure who'd spoken on Ikaros. 9 awaited them, unarmored now, though no less imposing. He walked barefoot across the steel floor. The tattoos running down his arms shimmered faintly, fractal patterns like circuitry and scars entwined. His voice was quiet, but final. "You came." Elira inclined her head. "You gave us coordinates. I assumed it meant something." "It does." They followed him in silence. The structure was vast, larger than it should have been. The halls bent in impossible geometries, lined with doors that didn't open, rooms that seemed to vanish when passed. Strange machinery pulsed with unseen function. Rail reached out to one crystalline panel, but the man stopped him with a wordless glance. Finally, they entered a circular chamber, walls covered in ancient maps, data screens running in multiple alien tongues. A central display showed shifting galactic charts, layered with red pulses. "These are conflict zones," Elira said softly. "Not yet," he replied. "But they will be." Rail circled the map. "You're tracking everything, every system, every species." "We must." Elira stepped forward. "Why show us this?" "Because you asked for our help. And in doing so, you reopened some in your kind buried long ago." She frowned. "We barely know who you are. You thought we were gone. Forgotten. You preferred it that way." He turned to face her fully. "We are the children of lost Earth, of the first Exodus, when your Concordat deemed us unstable, unfit, too violent, too unpredictable. They labeled us a death world race and abandoned us beyond the rim." Elira's heart beat harder. "But you survived." "We did more than survive. We adapted. We became the warning your ancestors etched into every stellar law. Do not summon what you cannot control." Rail swallowed. "Then why answer the call?" The man smiled, thin and cold. "Because we were watching, waiting, not for rescue missions, for moments of truth. And you, Commander Voss, you called for extinction and survived." He stepped toward the console and pulled up a file, her file. Elira's face stared back at her, younger, cleaner, back when she still believed in orders. "You fought without backup, with no strategic value. You refused to surrender even when logic demanded it." She stood still, fists clenched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we don't come to help." He turned the display again, zooming in on a flickering region of space near the Orion Rift. "We come to recruit." Rail stepped back. "You think we'd join you? After what we saw?" "We don't want armies. We want truth-bearers. Survivors. People who understand that mercy is a luxury and peace is temporary." The central map focused again, this time on a world slowly being engulfed in shadow. The things that attacked Ikaros, 9 were scouts. The real force comes behind them. Elira took a step closer. "Then why not warn the Concordat? They won't believe. They'll stall. They'll argue about ethics." He looked at her, voice lowering. "You've seen the cost of waiting." The room dimmed. A final message was etched into the air before them. Coordinates again, but this time accompanied by a countdown. 36 days. Elira stared at it in silence. Behind her, Rail whispered, "So what now?" She didn't answer. "Not yet." The countdown echoed in Elira's mind with every breath she took. 36 days. It wasn't time, it was a warning. A terminal diagnosis. Every decision from now on would ripple through lives and worlds. And she, once a forgotten commander on a doomed colony, had been handed the knowledge that might define what came after. Back aboard their ship, the silence between her and Rail was thick. The Deathworlder fortress had allowed them to leave without resistance, but the weight of what they carried clung to them like radiation. Neither had spoken since departure. There was nothing to say that wouldn't unravel them. Rail finally broke it, staring out into the starfield. "You're not going back to the Concordat, are you?" Elira didn't answer right away. She stood by the console, replaying the image of the growing shadow over the distant world. It wasn't hypothetical. It was a future already in motion. "They won't listen," she said at last. "The Council will dismiss it, suppress it, just like they buried the Deathworlders, just like they abandoned us." He nodded slowly. "Then what?" She turned to him, and something in her eyes had shifted, resolved, but colder than before. Then we start with the ones who will. In the days that followed, Elira used every unofficial channel she'd ever tapped, every favor owed, every disavowed node still pulsing beneath Concordat surveillance. She reached out to old soldiers, freighter captains, fringe researchers, rebel sympathizers, those who remembered the Rim Wars not as politics, but as fire and blood. Some believed her. Most didn't, but it only took a few. Word spread quietly about a commander who had stood beside Deathworlders and returned alive, about a fleet gathering not to conquer, but to prepare, about the enemy that had no face, only hunger. In the shadows of asteroid belts and beneath the clouds of gas giants, small ships began to gather. They bore no shared insignia, no banners, just scars and intent. Meanwhile, on Concordat Prime, silence turned to whispers and whispers of fear. Someone had leaked fragments of the encounter, footage, coordinates, a few blurred stills of the black-armored figures on Icaros 9, tearing apart the biomechanical horde. Counselor Mren stood before the security assembly, voice clipped and tight. This is an unauthorized myth, a fabrication meant to incite instability. We will cannot endorse communication with Deathworlders. It's a violation of core law. But not everyone agreed. Archivist Sela Darn released a redacted data to the public net under an anonymous tag. Not all of it, just enough. Enough to make people question. Enough to make them look. And that, Elira knew, was all she needed. Doubt was a seed, and war fed on it like oil to flame. The days burned fast. Rail recruited from surviving colonies, from among those who'd lost everything and had nothing left to fear. The Deathworlders, for their part, remained silent, but not absent. They watched. Their ships would appear in orbit for moments, then vanish. No communication, no guidance, only presence. One night, aboard a converted transport hidden in the Veil Nebula, Elira awoke to find a Deathworlder waiting at the edge of the cargo bay. No armor this time, just that same impossible stillness. "Your signal reaches far," he said. She stood slowly, voice calm. "You gave me the map. You drew your own path." They stared at each other in silence. "I don't want this war," she said. "War doesn't wait for permission." He stepped closer, placing a small device on a crate. It glowed faintly. A map again, but this time labeled with enemy hive signatures, trajectory estimates, weak points. "Then why help me?" The Deathworlder tilted his head, as if the question was alien. "Because you asked for help when others ran. Because you fought when no one believed. And because something worse is coming, Elira Voss. Worse than the swarm. Worse than silence." She narrowed her eyes. What could be worse? He didn't answer. He simply turned away. As he vanished, so did the device, downloaded directly into her ship systems, bypassing encryption like it wasn't there. 36 days had become 21. Her fleet, if it could be called that, numbered less than 100 ships. Some barely held together. Others bristled with modified weapons and experimental shields. Most had never fought outside pirate encounters or planetary sieges. But they came anyway. At the edge of the disputed zone, near the dead star of Eleron's grave, they gathered and waited. Elira stood on the bridge, watching her makeshift force settle into loose formation. No hierarchy, no orders, until she spoke. "This isn't about honor. It's not about flags or systems or treaties. You're here because you understand what's coming, because you'd rather stand and bleed than wait to die." The comms were silent, but no one left. Rail turned to her, voice low. "You think they'll come?" "They're already here." As if summoned by her words, the space beyond the dead star rippled. Folds in reality peeled back, and something began to emerge. Massive, chitinous, silent. A hive ship, one of the larger than any from Icaros 9. Then 2 more followed. Elira steadied herself. No more running. She gave the signal. And the ragtag fleet of the unwanted, the overlooked, the broken, survivors, smugglers, old soldiers, and perhaps the last living Deathworlders, opened fire. You said,